Okay.
Okay, let's see if I can share.
Mhm.
Can you guys see?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for being on here today. Hopefully this is helpful information. As Amy said, we don't have a whole lot of time, so we're not going to be diving very deep. So I just pulled some slides that I thought were important to help get you started in developing a transition class. I know some of you already have one in place, but others may be looking to start one or maybe enhance it. So we're going to provide you with an overview of some of the components and some points to consider, and then hopefully share some good resources for you. So as you guys know, a transition class basically helps students get the support and the instruction they need and the experiences they need to reach their goals, whether those are post-school goals for employment, for higher education, secondary, post-secondary education, or independent living. This link here is just a little blurb that Matt Sewell shared when he was director of special education about the importance of preparing students to be included in their community and how a transition class can do that. The transition class is a non-core academic class, and it is taught by a licensed special education teacher when you're using the course code. It can count as one of the career focus credits if you weren't aware of that. There are requirements to get career focus credits, and transition class can count as one of that. And then, of course, within the 22 required graduation credits. And these links will just take you to those documents sharing information about the graduation credits. And these next few slides are just showing you in the course code management system, which is something you may want to share with your counselors to prove essentially that the transition class can count as that career focus. And it falls under Rule 20 and Trian business rules as that career focus. And just a special note, it is a special education elective, but it can be awarded credit towards graduation and the required career focus credits. So that is the course code. We established that course code in 2013. So it's been around now for a long time, but many schools aren't using it. And it could be lack of awareness. So we continue to try to raise awareness. If you're using that course code, it's because you've attended our training, probably. That's what our hope is. And you have to be a licensed special education teacher because it is considered a special education service. So the course code, you may provide a transition class more than 1 year for students. And you're going to indicate that by, you know, varying your course code numbers or letters, however your school does it. But 971560 would be the first year that you're doing it. And then you can, as you see the examples there, differentiate each year. Let me just go back to say, I need to specify that the content, if you're providing the class more than a year to the same student, the content is not going to be the same, of course. I'm sure that makes complete sense, but just to make sure to specify that you're going to vary the content based on the student's need, but maybe they need that continued support that's found in a transition class. The components of the class itself, as you might imagine, the basis of transition plans are providing those transition assessments and, of course, exploring post-secondary options as well as post-secondary education options, as well as post-secondary employment options, independent living skills, making sure that students have the resources they need, that interagency collaboration, and then, of course, preparing them for those employment experiences. We also have work experience course codes, which I think I'm going to get into right now. So perhaps you've prepared your students for the workplace within the transition classes, and now they're ready to move into that work experience. Hopefully you knew, but maybe you didn't, that there are course codes for work experience. And each one of these different course codes indicates that it's an additional year of work experience. Probably most students aren't going to ever reach this, but sometimes that could happen. But if they're just out in the community or even at the school and they're working the entire class time, then you would use these work experience course codes. And we dive a little deeper into those in our training. We know based on research that when students have work experience in high school, that they are going to be 5 times more likely to have work when they leave high school. And so it's a predictor of positive post-school outcomes, which you probably know what a predictor is. It's that in-school experience that is correlated with improved post-school outcomes. We have 23 of them here. You can see that they cover all the domains of transition planning. And we want to show you these. And again, we dive deeper into these in our training because some of these could be things that you are including within your transition class, like self-advocacy and self-determination, or maybe travel skills or technology skills. We know that predictors lead to positive post-school outcomes, so why would we not want to implement them in our class? So just having a handle on those, and those are defined by different characteristics, which again, you would get that information in our training. Components of high quality work-based learning, we took this from Work-Based Learning Opportunities for High School Students. Understanding that there are clear roles and responsibilities of everyone involved in the class, from the student to the teacher to the paraprofessional. Perhaps there's a job coach, that there are opportunities for on-the-job learning, that there are agreements in place for the different work sites, and clear expectations and feedback provided by those people who are at the work sites as well. We created a practice profile for transition classes, and I'm going to click on this in hopes that you guys can see it. Can you see the practice profile? Okay. And so we describe the different core components, starting with preliminary considerations, and then going through the transition assessments, career exploration, self-determination, life skills, and post-secondary education and training, along with work experience, agency linkages and community participation. Naturally, we don't have time to dive into these, but I wanted to share this because this is a great tool to use when you're setting up your class, because it is telling you and describing those core components and how they can contribute to the outcomes. And then it's providing you somewhat of a rubric to determine, okay, here's where we don't want to be, but you might be there when you are getting started. And so if your transition plans aren't compliant and you're having difficulty, you may want to work on that aspect of transition programming before you start a transition class. So just kind of moving along this practice profile to the left to where you're getting to that expected use in practice. And although these are sort of indicators of where you are in your class is still going to look different depending on where you are, depending on your style, depending on the resources you have, and depending on your students' needs. But it's still a great way to start building your transition class and to assess where you are along the way. So as we went through, we just saw those core components, starting with the preliminary considerations. So as you're starting to build that, again, looking at your transition plans, have you gotten training from Arkansas Transition Services? Are your teachers prepared for that? Have you thought about the enrollment process for students into a class? Looking at the Department of Labor rules, making sure you have the staff, the materials, and the space, and then developing a scope and sequence, which we have templates for that. So you can sit down and really think about what is it we want our students to learn and how are we going to space this out to ensure that we're including all the essential components. And then once you've made those preliminary considerations, again, building on all the components that we talked about as I showed you that practice profile. And then as you're going along through your class, just keeping this question in mind, do our experiences within our program, are they helping students continue to explore their options to learn and define their career pathway? And if they're not, what are the needs? How can we continue to build upon that? So some of you may be wondering, how would you describe a transition class? We have some samples of just different levels of transition class and the prerequisite that you might set up for your students. Again, these are just examples. They're not anything that you have to do or definitions that you have to use, but they might help you in coming up with that. And maybe you want to tweak it. So for example, the first level class might be, the prerequisite might be just that approved application for the class. So what is your application going to look like? What do you want students entering into this class? What criteria do you want them to have before they enter? And then you're focusing on exploring their career interests and self-advocacy as they start to prepare for work. So thinking about those activities, but really focusing on the career exploration and self-determination is what would be a good start for transition classes. And then building upon those each time. So the prerequisite for 2 would be mastery of transition class 1, of course. And then you might get into the work experience, having mastered everything in transition 2 class. All of your students may not follow that. If this is what you decided to do, you may have some that are getting work experience and taking a transition class at the same time. So using 2 different course codes to denote that. I know I'm just blurting out a whole lot of information. I'm trying to be mindful of the time here. So once you start with the work experience piece of students in the transition classes, you might go to look at the work experience practice profile, which again is defining some core components and what it looks like, unacceptable, developmental in practice, and then the expected use in practice. So another handy tool to build your work experience classes. There are things to be aware of for IEP documentation, having that training plan, making sure that things are noted in the IEP, that you have a statement of needed transition services established. And some of these rules, like this first one here, you want to indicate if it's a non-paid training experience. The Department of Labor requires making sure you have that in a training plan. And so there's information on that in this manual that we created together with some input from Arkansas Rehab Services. So being aware of Department of Labor rules, even though they say you don't have to make it available to them, but if someone were ever to come to your school from the Department of Labor, which to our knowledge has never happened, then you would want to have certain things in place. Again, we're not diving into that today, but just knowing that there are certain things that you want to have in your IEP when you have a work-based learning program. And of course, you want relevant activities. This is one of our tools. Many of you have probably seen an activities mapping tool, just making sure that you have some of these activities in your transition plan and that you have a coordinated set of individuals helping you achieve those activities. And then, of course, the transition classes, listing those in the appropriate form, in the appropriate place on the course of study. Again, that's part of making sure that you have transition plans that are compliant and that are meaningful as well. Making sure you have an evaluation piece. So you might have your scope and sequence set up. You might be doing great work and activities in the classroom to prepare your students for the workplace. But are you getting the feedback? Are you letting students evaluate themselves? Are you asking your employers to evaluate? And you as the teacher, are you evaluating the students? So we have different tools for that because there are different preferences for how to do that. We also have a grading rubric for educators for that person who is going to be giving the grade. And it's just, we have a discussion in our training, but evaluations are definitely critical as you're providing work experiences for students, ensuring that they are looking at their preferences and interests. If it's a job that they like, do they understand how they are performing at the job? Do they understand what their needs are, what kind of support they need? So lots of different great reasons to consider, not to consider, but to provide evaluations from different perspectives. And then, is there a need for a job coach, which is that person who's going to specialize in providing support on the job for that student while they learn the job? Or if the job changes, do they need that job coach to come on board again and help assist with providing training for a new task, perhaps? So we talk about the need for job coaches and then what those characteristics are. We have information on training for job coaches. So that's essential in making your programs work. And then just, this sounds really simplistic, but knowing your students' preferences, those pins, as we call them, their preferences, their interests, their needs, and their strengths, not just plugging them into a job because it's available, but really getting to know what's available in the community, and what jobs match your students' interests and preferences and strengths, and then giving them those opportunities to practice, in the classroom, and then carrying those out into the community and off campus. So making sure you're considering what accommodations, what technology, not just job coaches, but what natural supports might be available on the job, which is really ideal for students to find those natural supports. A big part of this, as you work into, and probably Warren can speak to this, as you work into providing those work experiences, are building those business partnerships. So really doing your homework and looking at folks within the community, people looking at social media, who's expressing needs for good, valuable employees, for tasks and jobs that match your students' interests and preferences. Scheduling a visit to talk about what you're trying to do and how you're trying to, assist their company, but also meet the needs of your students and providing them work experience. Establishing that rapport and getting in, as you might say, so that you can get that second visit and really look at the culture there and the opportunities for a job, and if it's going to be conducive to having your students work there. and then identifying next steps, any barriers or problems that you might come across in providing continued work experience for your students. These vary by community often, but these are some pretty common partners in building your programs and establishing work experiences or work sites. Of course, Arkansas Transition Services and Arkansas Rehabilitation Services, the Department of Workforce Services, Career and Technical Education, all of these chambers of commerce, Rotary clubs, local colleges, transportation agencies, even those clubs that you may have on campus, which of course are going to vary by school campuses from East Lab to Special Olympics. Some campuses have best buddies, I know. So just really looking at the different resources you have that include not just families and where they work or who they know, but churches and staff that you work with as well that may have other connections.
Hey, Bonnie, we got about 2 minutes.
Okay, I think I'm about done. We also talk about resource mapping to identify some of those resources in your community, and we share resources with that. And then we can provide assistance in that resource mapping as well. But getting your students involved in that is a big part of resource mapping as well. And then, of course, requesting a transition class training from us. We don't just provide these annually because when we have, they weren't necessarily well attended. And so we do that based on requests now, and you can do that by contacting me or your transition consultant. And Marianne, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but you might have a minute left if you want to.
You did great.
I know one thing that can be a problem, and Marianne and I have talked about this, is just scheduling and how to make it work. And we can help you get creative with that. I know it can be hard if you're not on a block schedule to have enough time. So we've had lots of districts do that, and it's a good topic for discussion when you're among a lot of people doing it, and maybe Warren will address that too.
That's good. Thanks, Bonnie, for setting the stage and giving us the context. And everybody, as we transition to Warren, you'll have an evaluation at the end. So if Bonnie sparked an idea or something that you'd like to learn more about or have more conversation around, just jot that note down, because as Amy said, we will be planning these conversations, especially the professional development aspects, based on what you want. So we'd love to hear all of that. As we transition to Liz and Christy, we wanted just to share some kind of ways that we want to work together in these community conversations. And I'll ask Amy